I am an odd number. Take away a letter and I become even. What number did I start out as? Well done. You have gained access to the inner chamber, where she resides. Hello everyone, it's Ruben from Manascrew, and today we're diving into my build of Yennett Cryptic Sovereign, who was requested by Stephen Tinker. Stephen, I hope you'll enjoy my take on her. Yennett is a 2 generic white, blue, black commander. She is a 3/5 legendary Sphinx with flying, menace, and vigilance. And the key text on her, which reads, "Whenever Yennett Cryptic Sovereign attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If that card's converted mana cost is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, draw a card." Now, because of this, our library is almost entirely odd-costed cards, giving us a strange curve. And the fact that it triggers on attack rather than on damage is incredibly significant. Yennett is an interesting and unique commander. In my opinion, she should have been the forerunner of the Commander 2018 Esper product, as her ability represents the top of the library matters theme that they were going for far better than Aminatou, who to me seems more focused around blinking things. Not only does her ability allow us to cheat things into play, it adds some character to the card that makes building Yennett a pleasure and a wonderfully interesting challenge. Her ability is seriously unique, especially among the other Esper commanders that are available. Being able to proc her ability without dealing damage is such a great boon to the deck, and allows us more flexibility with how we build her. This build leans heavily towards manipulating the top of your library, so you have an ease of access to all your great spells when you want them, and keeping your lands as far away from Yennett's ability as possible. So, let's talk about how we're going to get to the point where we want to be. Yennett is 5 mana, and we want to ensure that we can get there smoothly and consistently. In this respect, our deck has a few forms of ramp. Commander Sphere, Chromatic Lantern, Soul Ring, Solemn Simulacrum, these are all the standards, and they get the job done, but notably we're also running Land Tax, Smothering Tithe, and some mana fixing in the form of Realm Right. This will help us get to the spells we need to cast like Yennett that will help us start pumping out and cheating out bigger spells. As you might expect from these colours, we are running a suite of answers. We have Anguish Unmaking, Sudden Spoiling, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, and a whole host of board wipes. So, Yennett's ability allows you to cheat stuff in. But what are these odd cards that we want to get out on the battlefield? Well, let's open with the most flavorful card in the deck, Void Winnower. This card is a great hate card that hates on even converted mana costs. I can't see a match better for a Yennett deck. And speaking of Void Winnower, this brings me on to my next few cards, which are the big Eldrazi beaters that we're going to include. Pathraiser of Ulamog, Ulamog Infinite Gaia, Emrakul, The Promised End, and even Artisan of Kozilek. We are also running Conduit of Ruin. But wait, Conduit of Ruin is even costed. Yes, this card is not meant for casting with Yennett's ability, but is meant for setting us up to use it. Grabbing one of your Eldrazi's out of your library and putting it on top main phase, leaving it prime and ripe for Yennett to cast during combat. Darksteel Colossus isn't an Eldrazi, but he is a huge indestructible beater that can come down on turn 5 and swing in for more damage on turn 6 than your opponents will be expecting. Lord of the Void and Sepulchral Primordial will allow us to have our pick of our opponent's good cards. Debtor's Knell also accomplishes a similar effect, but allows us to select our own creatures that have fallen to the side as well. Generally, decks that like cheating things in tend to be a lot more spell heavy, and you might be able to tell that our deck is quite creature heavy from what we've talked about thus far, especially as far as Esper decks are concerned. But we save all of our non-creature slots for some of the most powerful effects we can. Brilliant Ultimatum, Clone Legion and Expropriate, all of which incredibly powerful spells that we'll be getting for free with Yennett, and likely will help us win the game that turn or very soon after. The last huge spell of note that I want to talk about is Baneful Omen. This card has ended games before. Manipulating the top card of your library so that every end step a Darksteel Colossus is sitting up there and dealing 11 damage to each opponent is incredibly powerful stuff. And a lot of our cards have high mana cost, so Baneful Omen can easily win you some games. But, speaking of manipulating the top of your library, let's talk about how we're going to do that. I call, and for the rest of this video will be calling, the sort of reconfiguring and reordering the top of your library thinking effects. And these thinking effects are where the real meat of this build lies. Being able to manipulate the top of our library is the best way to make use out of Yennett's ability, which is exactly what was intended by the commander deck that she came from. To use her ability to full effectiveness, we'll want to be looking through the top of our library and making sure that the top card is a card that we can cast. First we'll go over some of the more budgeted ways of doing this, and then into some of the more expensive options. Firstly, Explorer's Scope and Aqueous Form do exactly what we want, allowing us to attack with Yennett and get any of those pesky lands or dirty, even-costed spells out of the way, so her ability can hit something huge. Aqueous Form also gives us the benefit that we can keep Yennett safe on the attack. If we haven't got any of our more premium thinking cards, blind swinging with Yennett can be risky, so Aqueous Form gives us some safety with the combat phase, and both cards give us the ability to get cards we don't want out of the way. Lens of Clarity literally just allows us to look at the top of our library whenever we wish. Similarly, we run Future Sight, and although powerful, we do want to be careful with when we play this sort of effect. We don't want our opponent removing Yennett pre-combat when they see an Emrakul or Ulamog revealed up there. The more expensive ways of manipulating the top card of our library are Sensei's Divining Top, Mystical Tutor, Soothsaying, and Scroll Rack. These cards, Sensei's Divining Top and Scroll Rack in particular, have grown pretty pricey, but if there was ever a deck that can utilize them to their full potential, it's Yennett. And if you want to save a little bit of money and aren't interested going to Commander tournaments, you can get the gold-bordered Scroll Rack for pretty cheap by comparison to its normal price. Any tutor that puts things to the top of our library are very good. Hell, that's why Conduit of Ruin is one of the best includes we have. It can just put an Emrakul up there. But Mystical Tutor lets us grab an Expropriate or a Brilliant Ultimatum to cast off the top, which could potentially be even better. Ponder and Index allow us to only get one shot to reorganize the top of our library and not miss our chance to blow, yo. Finally, what if some of our cards get stuck in our hand? Well, luckily there's another card from Commander 2018 that's pretty good at swapping some of our hand to our library. Aminatou the Fate Shifter is a great repeated way of getting this effect, but we also have Brainstorm and Dream Cache. Yes, in this deck, Brainstorm is so good that we're willing to pay 2 extra mana for almost the exact same effect. Scroll Rack also serves the same purpose here. Isolated Watchtower, Moonring Isle, and Halimar Depths all allow us to look at the top of our library, and we run all the Scrylands we can in our colours. Mortuary Maya lets us grab some of our big stuff out of our grave and cast it again. These lands are so good in this deck. Finally, if we're really stuck on mana and we've had an Ulamog or a Emrakul floating around in our hand since the start of the game, the worst case scenario is we run Arcane Artisan, which allows us to send a token copy of any creature from our hand to the battlefield. But we won't get any of the cast triggers off our big Eldrazi's. My build of Yennett has chosen to go a bit more flavorful with a few of our slots, selectively choosing some of the best Sphinx buddies to back Yennett up. Arbiter of the Ideal is one of the few even-costed cards along with Conduit of Ruin, whose effect is just too good to pass up. Its ability to pull over 2/3 of our deck off the top of our library and cheat it in synergizes too well to not include it, in my opinion. Enigma Sphinx gives us a wonderful high-cost cascade effect that, whenever it would die, comes back third from the top of our library, which allows us to cheat it again with Yennett. And Cascade, again! We have Etherswan, we have an Adjudicator for some nice repeatable removal, which, although technically not a Sphinx in name, I mean, look at it. Its creature type should be Gargoyle Sphinx Construct or something. Magister Sphinx is just nice and mean, and Prognostic Sphinx allows us to filter through the top of our library. Sphinx Ambassador is... gross! Man, that art is gross. I want my Sphinx to look like this, not some real-ass woman. Damn. Anyway, Sphinx Ambassador continues the trend of being able to take some of our opponent's cards and use it against them. And it gives you a fun guessing game to play with your opponents as it resolves. Finally, Sphinx of the Final Word brings us some counter protection from when we're about ready to tutor for an Expropriate or a Brilliant Ultimatum. We have many powerful enter the battlefield effects in this deck, and we want to get the maximum use out of them. So what better way of utilizing them than some blink effects? Most of these are also a great way of reclaiming your permanents when your opponents try and get a hold of them. Now, we don't want to go too hard on the blink theme, just enough to get some value. We are of course already running Aminatou, but Brago and Eldrazi Displacer also make the cut for some ways of getting some great value out of our creatures with ETBs. I talked a bit about how versatile Eldrazi Displacer is in my underrated cards video, but here specifically we can also use it to blink Yennett after the attack trigger if we don't want to put her in danger. Or we can use it to blink an opponent's attacking creatures, to keep ourselves safe. So now we're going to talk about some of the cool things we can do with this deck, and some of the notable synergies between cards and Yennett, or just between two of our includes. First off, Helm of the Host is a card I've included in the deck because with our thinking cards, we can actually often organize a few high cost cards in a row. Helm of the Host lets us get a copy of Yennett out, even though she's a legendary creature, and begin sending 2 Yennetts out, which will cast 2 huge spells in one turn. That can outright win you the game. In a similar respect, we've also included Strionic Resonator, which allows us to duplicate Yennett's effect. Yennett's ability triggers when you declare her as an attacker, meaning that her ability goes onto the stack and can be copied with Strionic Resonator. I've seen this deck cast a Plague Wind and an Ulamog in the same turn, and I have to say that's a brutal way to get ahead in a game. Next is a small combo between 2 of our thinking cards. Future Sight is a card that allows us to play the top card of our library, with the small downside of also having to reveal it. So long as you pick your window well, this card is incredibly powerful, and one such window is when you have Sensei's Divining Top out. Sensei's Divining Top lets us look at the top 3 cards of our library, but more importantly for this combo, it can be tapped to draw us a card, and then it goes on the top of our library, where it can now be played with Future Sight, meaning you can draw a card, pay 1 mana, draw another card, again and again, repeatedly drawing a card for 1 mana. Just drawing the cards for this mana cost is enough value, but this can get any cards we want out of the way of Yennett's ability. Very powerful stuff. Last thing I'll mention here is a combo that anybody who has bought a Brago King Eternal deck will know. Brago reads that when he deals combat damage, you can flicker any number of non-land permanents you control. This ability is another triggered ability, which means you can duplicate it with Strionic Resonator. When Brago deals damage, you respond by tapping the Resonator to copy the ability. Now you'll flicker everything twice. But since Brago's ability says you can flicker any non-land permanents, you can also flicker the Resonator. So if you have any artifacts or other non-land permanents that tap for 2 mana, say a Soul Ring, you can flicker the Resonator and the Soul Ring. Both come back untapped, and you can respond to Brago's initial trigger again, and again, and again, allowing you to flicker every single one of your non-land permanents. Infinite times! We haven't even mentioned all the powerful ETBs we have in this deck. Infinite times! This is my full list, and a link is included in the description to the TappedOut page if you're interested in checking it out, but now I'm going to talk about some of the other potential cards that I haven't used, but you might want to use. some routes that you could take with the deck. If you find any of these interesting at all, there are cards you could take out from the Blinks or Sphinx theme of the deck to make room for them. Now, this deck was initially built for my girlfriend, which means I have to play against it as well. So I built it to bring power to a table and be able to win games, but not to be so unpleasant to play against. However, if you want your friends to really dislike you, Yennett does allow for some pretty harsh things by being able to cost such high mana cost spells. Now, she also has Vigilance, and allows you to cast things off the top of your library for free, so there's definitely a version of this deck you could play that runs Armageddons, Stasis, Winter Orb, Blind Obedience, but please don't tell anyone I told you. With this, you would still be allowed to swing with Yennett and cast your spells for free, but your opponents would have had their legs completely cut off and have to restart the whole race from scratch, especially if you hit a Plague Wind. Another option is to go a bit more similar to many of the Narset decks out of there. Yennett is reliant on attacking to get her triggers off, and so you could throw in as many odd extra turn cards as you can find to keep the free casting of spells going, because every time you get a new turn, you get a new combat, and a new combat means a new opportunity to cast a new spell, which might be a new extra turn spell, which means you get a new combat. Sorry. Temporal Mastery is particularly good here because you can manipulate your library so you can miracle it instead of straight casting it. Time Warp, Temporal Trespass, Savor the Moment, Nexus of Fate, Temporal Manipulation, of course Expropriate, and even Capture of Jingzhou, which would be great if you were able to find one in English. God, there are actually a lot of extra turn cards with odd mana costs. What have I done? Another way we can make use of all the thinking effects we include in the deck is to run miracle cards. Now this one is probably the weakest of the alternate routes in my opinion, since there aren't enough miracles to make a full theme out of them, and it's sort of almost counter to Yennett's ability wanting to cast the cards. But if you're a big fan of miracles, and believe me, they're great, this is a route you could use to replace a few of the cards in the deck with. Finally, you could commit to the full flavor win and go for Sphinx Tribal galore, including Dream Eater, Uthun, Windreader, Master of Predicaments, and Unesh. I have to say this is one of my favorite routes, because so many of these Sphinxes have these little fun mini-games stapled to them that make the deck have a lot of interaction with your opponent's stuff. Go away, Sphinx Ambassador, no! Thank you all for watching. I've been Ruben from Manascrew, so that's my take on Yennett Cryptic Sovereign. I hope this gives you some ideas for a deck, and I hope you've all been enjoying all the interesting interactions and such I include in these deck techs. I do think Yennett is an incredibly fun and unique commander. She kind of has a more fair Narset feel, which is great. As always, I'm a small channel, so if you feel you like this video and you feel like it deserves more attention, please give it a like and comment on what you'd like to see in a future video. Happy brewing, folks.